Hello everybody, it is the Royal Blue podcast brought to you by the Liverpool Echo. I'm Ian Croll and we are live across YouTube and Facebook. Please remember to like, follow and subscribe to our Facebook page and YouTube channel, and also please send in your questions. Just to warn everyone, disclaimer, I have got a bit of a cold, so I am powering through and I hopefully will get through today's show. Joining me on today's show we have the Everton FC correspondent home and away, Joe Thomas. Joe, how's the mood?
You warned me that you might sneeze, not that you might drop. Like,
no,
that sounded pretty worrying there.
No, I feel fine. I've got no aches and pains. I've just got a bit of a head cold.
Right.
But, you know, forget about me. More importantly, we're here to talk about Everton.
Of course.
Well, yeah, Joe, you know, we're obviously going to get into it. We're going to deep dive, going to break down the match. We were both there on Saturday, but, you know, it was a bit of a debacle, wasn't it? Just how you feeling at this moment in time after, you know, Saturday's defeat and cup exit?
It was a bad performance, wasn't it? It was a bad performance, and I think it was a bad performance at a bad time, if that makes sense. Yeah. It was a really frustrating one. I think Everton at the minute, I think there are more reasons to be positive than perhaps immediately obvious, but it does feel like we're back to a situation where it's a club that's in search of a bit of momentum, and it felt like Saturday was an easy is the wrong word, but it felt like Saturday was an opportunity to build that. You know, they hadn't had a bad month. Essentially, if you look at the Palace games and the Villa game, it was 3 unbeaten, 3 clean sheets in a row. Come up against a Luton side that Everton have seen in action already this season. They know their strengths. At home against Goodison Park, 4th round of the Cup, you know, I know that they're injury depleted, but I just hope to see more. I thought that it was a game that Everton would win. I thought it was a game that Everton should win, and I don't think that was being complacent. I just think that I would have liked to have imagined that they would have been better. In the end, they didn't deserve to win, and obviously they didn't win. And it's one of those ones where I think there was an element to it which is probably a bit of a free hit, and I wonder if Dyche considered it a little bit that way. Through his tactical changes, and part of me wonders if, you know, he kind of, in the context of the wider season, bearing in mind that we know Premier League survival is first and foremost, if he saw this game as the last opportunity for him to just have a look at something a little bit different, last opportunity for him to experiment where the consequences weren't as severe if they went wrong. And obviously he went with Beto and Calvert-Lewin. It really clearly didn't work. In fairness to Dyche, asked him about him afterwards and he seemed to accept that it didn't work. So hopefully there's no naivety there. But when you look at where he is at the minute and how important we know Doucoure is to the side, and obviously we know where Doucoure is injury-wise at the moment, it's not, you know, he's obviously not available. He's not going to be available for Fulham and quite possibly not for Tottenham. Maybe there was part of him which thought this is my last opportunity to just try something truly different to see if I can overcome the hurdle that is trying to get Everton to be able to attack without Abdoulaye Doucoure. It didn't work. He learnt a lesson, so that might be valuable. But I think in the short term, it's come at the expense of a bit of momentum. Because I think that, you know, looking at the Everton fan base, or a lot of the Everton fan base, speaking to people, looking on social media, listening to, you know, some of the fan podcasts, a very good fan podcast as well, it feels like there's been a little bit of a deflation. And as a result of that, I kind of wonder if Luton was a missed opportunity just to try and get things into a little better place ahead of what's actually a really big week for the club.
Well, we've just been talking about it, haven't we, just before we went on air and started recording, you know, momentum. You've just touched on it there. We had all the momentum, you know, going for us, you know, prior to probably the Fulham defeat. It is so fragile. We kind of stopped the rot a little bit with, you know, the draw against Palace in the cup, and then we obviously, the replay, we ended up winning that. Got a decent draw against Villa at home. But regardless of, you know, Dyche's tactics or his formation, you know, those players on that pitch they surely should be good enough to beat a Luton team. And no disrespect to Luton, because they're the only ones down there in the relegation zone, seemingly putting up a fight. But the table at the moment is kind of lying, isn't it? Because we shouldn't be where we are. We should be a little bit higher. Luton, effectively our rivals, and they've just got another one over us again. It's just so frustrating to go out the cup.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with all of that, in the sense that Luton have grown into the season and got stronger. And I think that they're a very well-drilled side. And the reality is, Luton probably now are what Everton were back end of November, beginning of December, in the sense that they have an identity. They know what they are. They know who they are. They know their strengths. They know the way in which they're going to win games.
Is that not what Everton's strengths are when we were, four wins in a row though as well?
Yeah, that's it. That's which is exactly what Everton were then.
Yeah.
The problem is, since that Fulham defeat and the injuries that have happened since, and the loss of momentum, and obviously the points deduction skews it as well, because of what it makes you're filled with fear when you look at the table, when really it should be a side that's sitting 12th, 11 points clear from the bottom. And with the injuries and with everything else, obviously Dyche now has to try and find a new identity for that group of players without Abdoulaye Doucoure. And he's struggling to do so far. And
Does it literally just rest on Abdoulaye Doucoure not being in the starting 11?
Partly. I mean, that's a big part of it. Look, we know that Everton have got a squad of probably, no more than 14, 15 senior players that Sean Dyche trusts. And, it probably was, Doucoure is probably there with Dominic Calvert-Lewin and Jordan Pickford as they're the three main players that Everton would really struggle to do without. Now, Calvert-Lewin's importance is still very significant, but the fact that in the summer Everton finally got themselves a situation where they signed someone that can at least attempt to do the same job as him, or a similar job than him in Beto, means that there are ways of that Everton side functioning effectively without Dominic Calvert-Lewin in it. It doesn't seem to be a way of doing so without Abdoulaye Doucoure, particularly when Andre Gomes, who emerged as potential cover over Christmas, is also out injured, and when you throw in the fact that obviously Idrissa Gueye is unavailable as well. But I, talk about players should be good enough to kind of come through the tactics. I'm not sure they can, because I think the tactics were very, very blunt and very obvious on Saturday. I think if the players had been told to play that way, there was a moment in that first half when João Virginia claimed the ball, played very well again. João Virginia claimed the ball in his own box, and he ran to the edge of his box, and Jack Harrison was a couple of yards in front of him, and it looked for all the world as if he was about to lay it off, and Jack Harrison had so much space to run into, and he thought, right, he's going to go with it, we're going to surge forward. And it was almost like in the back of his mind, just as he was about to release the ball, something went, and João Virginia just went, I know I've been told not to do this, and instead he launched a long ball forward towards Calvert-Lewin and Beto, which is what they did throughout the whole first half and a lot of the game, and it just sailed harmlessly over everyone's heads. So I think that clearly there was a tactical approach that had been set up there, and I'm not sure that the players can necessarily overcome that, if they've been told to play that way. Particularly, it becomes even harder when, and this is one of the things that kind of baffles me a little bit about Saturday, is of all the teams in the Premier League that you're going to use that style of play against, Luton
long ball
probably
approach.
The worst. They've got some big centre-backs that are used to that type of football, and I'm not going to say they dealt with it comfortably. It was chaotic in the first half. Everton got into situations where they could have created good chances. They didn't quite come off, but there were a few times when second balls were just bouncing all over the place, kind of, 35, 40 yards from Luton's goal. And if there was someone to pick up on them from an Everton perspective, there were options to play out wide or through. They just didn't happen. There were some opportunities, but largely it's if you offer that Luton side a way of opposition playing against you, it would be that. And again, who's the best person to have running onto the ball? Who normally fills that space from there, albeit with different tactics? When the second ball is there to be 140 yards from someone else's goal, it's normally Doucoure bursting forward, isn't it?
Well, we just thought you've hit the nail on the head, because it's exactly what we said after the game. We made it far too easy for them, and Luton are the last team you want to be hitting long balls up to. Like I said, I don't think it was easy for them, but we didn't attempt to get the ball in behind. We didn't even attempt to get the ball down the channels. We didn't even attempt to get many crosses in. It was literally just we've got two big strikers up the pitch who quite clearly, I don't want to suggest that can play together, but they struggle to play together. So in that sense now then, has, before the game, it was kind of like 4-4-2, two strikers up front. Let's see how this goes. You suggested it was kind of an experimental lineup. Have we got a striker problem now? Because we seemingly play better with the one striker up front, but we've got two strikers there who are going to be expecting to play virtually every game. We know Calvert-Lewin's probably better at holding the ball up. Nothing really sticks when Beto, gets the ball into his feet. His first touch is really poor. And he seemingly just gets really frustrated when he comes on the pitch. And Calvert-Lewin is just going through a really, worrying goal drought as well at this moment in time.
I don't think there's a striker problem, but I do think obviously that Calvert-Lewin's got a goal drought, and that is an issue. It's interesting because where Everton had their most success on Saturday was the odd opportunity when they got the ball down out wide. We saw Calvert-Lewin surge past a few players on the left in the first half, cut inside, and there was an obvious ball to Harrison, who was in so much space in the middle. He didn't take it, and I had a little bit of sympathy for him because I'm not sure if he ever thought it was quite on, if he could ever get it past it, because he had two men on him. And in the end, he held it up and played in Beto on the edge of the area, and Beto put it just wide. That was a nice move. That caused Luton problem. The other one was the big switch from Tarkowski to Mykolenko, and again got the ball down out wide, whipped the cross in. It was Dwight McNeil who headed it straight at Tim Croll. Again, one of the better aspects of play came from the few times that they diverted away from what felt like the obvious, the very aggressively direct tactics that they've been set up to play, which just bypassed the whole midfield and was problematic. I don't think there's any expectation to be starting games from Beto ahead of Dominic Calvert-Lewin. I think he's probably well aware of where he is in the pecking order. I think where there might be a little bit of expectation is in at some point Beto is going to say, well, I think we're up to about 15 games now where Calvert-Lewin hasn't scored. So at some point he's going to say, well, when do I get my chance to start again? Obviously the last time he did so was Forest away. Well, he didn't do bad. He missed a big chance early doors. But again, what he did was what Everton have lacked for 2 years, where he enabled Everton to carry on playing in the same way that they would play with Dominic Calvert-Lewin, even with Dominic Calvert-Lewin absent. So it was positive. It still comes back to the Doucoure problem. How do you deal with Doucoure? Because I don't think that. I'd be shocked to see two. I'd be shocked to see those two up front again. Like I do wonder if Arnaud Danjuma off one of those big men could work. It would have to be a different approach. It wouldn't be a direct long ball, but him playing as a support striker could work. But that probably requires Dyche to do something that doesn't look like he's particularly keen to do, because the situation with Danjuma is confusing, because I don't really understand how he hasn't started either the last two games.
I mean, it's I don't want to go into too much on that because it's not really football talk, but it's obviously running. But what about Dobbin? I think it's been in the back of people's minds about if we're going to go two up top again, it would be a main striker and a second striker. Yeah. Obviously, you mentioned Danjuma, but would Dobbin be able to fit in that role?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a school of thought. I mean, we typically see Dobbin off the wing. When he's played, when he's come on for Everton, that's where he's played, and when he's typically been used in the under 21s, that's where he's been played. But there are people within the Everton setup, and there are people that have tracked Dobbin's career that think he's far better as a forward.
Okay.
But I don't think you're in a scenario where it makes sense to start him over Danjuma, given the fact that Danjuma is, whether it be coming in from the left or whether it be as a support striker, has had a relatively successful senior career where he's played some of the top leagues and he's scored the goals that have taken Villarreal to the latter stages of the Champions League. I mean, there's an asset there that's not being used. And I think it was completely understandable that he wasn't getting minutes before Christmas, because look at the form Everton were in, and look at the form that Dwight McNeil and Jack Harrison were in. But this month, when injuries have bitten, and when there have been games which, the cup games that perhaps have a little bit less riding on them, it felt like, considering Danjuma is desperate for minutes, and there are clearly opportunities for him to get those minutes elsewhere, albeit Everton would have to release him from his loan contract for that to happen. It just seems a strange situation to be both keeping him but not playing him, and not playing him at a time when the side could do with some attacking quality and is looking to plug holes due to injuries and looking for something slightly different.
Yeah.
And I think it'll be really, really interesting to see what happens against Fulham, because with the Beto and Calvert-Lewin experiment having failed as dramatically as emphatically as it did, then one alternative, the obvious alternative for Fulham on Tuesday is to go back to one up top, and probably to either play, Jack Harrison, move him behind him, and that has had a little bit of success this season, and then Danjuma comes out on the wing, or for Harrison to stay on the wing and Danjuma to play off either Beto or Calvert-Lewin.
We'll come on to team selection, but just on that, I think you are right. He's got very limited choice in what he wants to do. There's no way he can play two up top again, and I do think it's obviously it is about bringing one of them wide players. Obviously, injury pending. We come on to injuries and who's going to be available soon enough, but it could be a case of bringing one of those wide players into the middle of the park. Just a reminder, everyone watching live, YouTube, Facebook, get your questions in, get your opinions in. Joe, there's one from YouTube channel called The Blues. He says, we attempted to get in behind and down the side so many times. Mengi mopped up everything in behind, and McNeil and Harrison couldn't beat their man. You agree? Did we try to get in behind?
I didn't really think we tried to get in behind that much.
No.
We tried to go over the top a lot, try and win the first ball, or at least create a messy second ball. But what happened was, because everything was going so aggressively direct, you just ended up in a situation where Beto and Calvert-Lewin were just so isolated from anybody else that there wasn't anyone else there to win the second ball. And yeah, you're right, Harrison and McNeil kind of got completely cut out of that system, and you wonder if was it tactics, or was it their kind of struggle to interpret them? Dyche said after the game that this is a side that a group of players isn't used to playing 4-4-2, and he's got a point. That was abundantly clear the other day. And obviously where two strikers can work together, they're two strikers of a similar profile, aren't they? So that's problematic. But also what's clearly an issue is the fact that they haven't played that much together in that format. The only other time they've done it was when they were chasing an equaliser against Luton in the league, and that failed miserably then. But we saw it again the weekend. There were times when they were going for the same ball, and that's if your game plan is to win a knockdown for someone else, but both players are going for the ball, then it's just a mess. I think, kind of said, the times when they did have a little bit of success, where they got a little bit in behind, when say Mikalenko got beyond his fullback and whipped a cross in, and McNeil had a good chance. There wasn't enough of that. There wasn't enough ingenuity, and I think it's legitimate to be frustrated with the wide players for their performances, but I'm not sure where the responsibility on that lies. And then because like I say, they spent the whole game bypassing midfield. You look at Onana and Garner, a game that you would hope that they'd be able to kind of dictate. Well, they were just bypass, weren't they?
Non-existent.
What chance do they have if most of the time the ball's going over their head? There's only so much they can do, isn't there? Safe
to say that the partnership wasn't complementing each other. I mean, is this a case of this, partnership is never tried again, or just is there anything that you saw in there that you think, yeah, there is something, but it needs a bit of work, and we can try it?
It does create chaos. It does create chaos. As I say, there were times in the first half at 0-0 where Everton got into positions where they could have created good chances but didn't. A few times Beto or Calvert-Lewin got the ball and didn't really make the most of it, or they created enough chaos to have a ball bounce around the space halfway inside the Luton area, but because they were so isolated, there was no one around them to pick it up. So it wasn't it was bad. It wasn't great. I'd be very surprised to see it again. And I think Dyche's comments after the game suggest it would be a surprise to see it again, because he seemed to be happy to acknowledge that it didn't work. I don't think it could work I don't think you'd see it again with complete the same tactics. Like they would say, it was just so aggressively over the top to them that that can't work again, I don't think. But I think that, again, it's easy to be very critical and to go here and go, what was he thinking, or things like this. And I don't really have an issue with him trying it. I didn't think it would work because we'd seen it previously. But when you look, I mean, there are a couple of things we probably need to take into account. And one is the fact that he's experimenting out of necessity because he's just got a very, very small squad that is now, depleted by injuries and the Africa Cup of Nations absence of Idrissa Gueye. So there's only so many things that he can do. And as frustrating as it was to be knocked out of the cup, Luton was perhaps one last opportunity to experiment without the pressure of the league there, to maybe just try and find a solution. And I think another thing as well is that there has been a significant number of fans suggesting that Beto and DCL should start up top together. When I go to Finch Farm normally every Thursday and I put out me see if anybody wants me to ask any questions, every week without fail I get asked when that's going to happen. Now, Dyche should not be selecting his side or anything like that to try and prove a point to either give the fans what they want if he doesn't believe it's going to be the case, or to try and make a point. But I think that one thing that will come out of Saturday is I'd be surprised if I get too many of those questions again.
Okay. No, I agree. Well, the questions keep coming in, the opinions keep coming in, and we've got another one who kind of disagrees with us, Joe. So David Atherton on YouTube has said, disagree that tactics were a fault. If you can't pass a ball, defend the set piece, or win any second balls, it doesn't matter what formation you play. So, thanks for the question or the opinion, David.
I mean, they didn't win the second balls because there's no one there to compete for them, because the two strikers were competing for the same ball, and then they were so isolated from everyone else. I think, obviously, the passing wasn't great, but it was clear that there was an emphasis on not playing short football and not playing passes around the midfield and defence. It was get it up as quickly as effectively as possible. So I think tactics were an issue. He's definitely right on corners. Look, I don't know if we'll come to this, but David, you're 100% true on that. Look, Everton lost at home to Fulham a couple of months ago. Luton a couple of months ago, and both goals came from set pieces. Yeah. Both goals came from Alfie Doughty's left foot, and it's clear what Fulham's tactics are there. It's clear how dangerous they are, and Dyche kind of, after the game, dismissed it as being a bit unlucky. They got 2 goals from set pieces. That's what they did, but the reality was they caused problems from set pieces throughout the game.
It was almost an error in inevitability.
Yeah, there was.
Score from that
exactly. There was the one right at the beginning of the second half when Carlton Morris wanted him for a really good save out of João Virginia, and that's clearly one of the biggest attributes that one of the biggest strengths of that Luton side. They played to it and Everton fell into the trap, and it's a bit frustrating that they couldn't work out how. I mean, look, Luton are very, very good at those set pieces. They have some wonderful certainly in Alfie Doughty they have a wonderful set piece taker, and there's some big lads that are very good in the air. Sometimes there's only so much you can do against a side as powerful as that, but Everton have some big lads as well, and you just think, bearing in mind you knew that would be the big threat, it's a bit frustrating that there wasn't any obvious attempt to kind of mitigate it. Yeah. And they couldn't do so within the game either, and that frustrated me in the game against Luton the first time round. Tom Lockyer had a header that, I think it was either Tom Lockyer or Carlton Morris at 0-0 had a header from a corner or a free kick in that game, which was a powerful header. He won it easily, big let off for Everton, and then the next set piece went to the back post and someone was unmarked, and the next set piece, and you just, one thing that I think is a legitimate concern both on the pitch and in the dugout is there seems to be a lack of adaptability to the situation as a game unfolds, learning from what is happening. And I think this is perhaps where David may have a point on this, maybe you, when you asked the question earlier, at some point you would like to think that there's a bit of an onus on the players to take some responsibility and accountability for when things aren't working. But obviously when the tactics were as much as they weren't working, it was clear that they'd been told to play a certain way. Probably how much influence they have in overriding that system's a difficult one to try and work out, really.
Okay, then, so we'll just break down a little bit of the game. The first goal, was it a foul on Calvert-Lewin? Push? I don't think it was, although at the time I kind of probably was screaming for it.
there's contact made, isn't there? It's the type of thing which you feel at the minute that I think it's 50-50.
Yeah. Do you think he could be stronger?
I'm not coming away from that game thinking VAR has cost Everton again.
Yeah.
What I am thinking though is that if Everton score that goal against Fulham tomorrow night, I think it probably gets disallowed. So I think that's probably where I am on that.
I mean, I just think he probably could be stronger, Calvert-Lewin. And
even Dyche said he could have been stronger after. If Dyche is saying, I mean, obviously we know, if Dyche is kind of like casting aspersions on his own player in that scenario, that probably suggests that even he doesn't feel as strong about as he does about some of the others.
Yeah. Okay, we get ourselves back in the game, probably from a goal we didn't even deserve. But it comes from a Jack Harrison goal, and it's in a position of central position, and we've just been talking about, do we move a winger, a wide play in the centre of the park. So obviously definitely one for Dyche to think about, injuries pending.
Yeah, well, I'm surprised he didn't do it the other day. I'm surprised we haven't seen more of it this month, to be honest. I don't think Jack Harrison is the perfect solution.
No.
When Doucoure is out, but I think he's comfortably the best one that we've seen. And I thought Harrison, he played that role against Newcastle when they won 3-0, and I thought he did all right. Played a few nice through balls to Dominic Calvert-Lewin. He played it in the Palace in the third round, the first game, down at Selhurst Park, and Danjuma was out wide, and again he slipped in Danjuma with a nice ball or two in that game as well. So I think I bearing in mind that I don't think he fancies Danjuma in that role. For me, the obvious way to go against Fulham, with the injuries and the absences that Everton have, is Harrison back in that kind of number 10 role, and playing Danjuma out wide. That feels like the best of the solutions that we have available, especially with Gomes injured. And not entirely sure how sustainable a solution Gomes would be, and even then, where best to play him in that midfield. But obviously, he was very, very good when he came on against Spurs. Back on December the 23rd, he was excellent, and then he kind of had good moments and bad moments in the games after that. But obviously, scored the big goal against Palace as well. I think it's easy to kind of be critical on tactics and say, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? I guess two things we know is, one, Dyche is changing things out of necessity because he's got a limited squad, which isn't his fault, and he's got a lot of injuries, which happens but isn't necessarily his fault. So I mean, that's that obviously has a huge impact. But he can't go the same way again. And then, sorry, the second point I was going to say was he obviously learned. He at least he come out, and God, I'm having to work hard to grab any positives from Luton. But at least they came away there having learned something, and that is surely they put to bed Beto and Calvert-Lewin, at least with those tactics.
Yeah, I would. Couldn't agree more. I mean, I think with Gomes, I'm at pains to put too much emphasis and pressure, because we all know he's a quality player, but he's probably, if anything, he just lacks consistency. That's his being his Everton career.
Fitness as well, and that's it. And that's the danger. I think that Everton are in danger of. Everton only have a plan A, and that plan A, Abdoulaye Doucoure is key to it, and that's Abdoulaye Doucoure, been brilliant last year, 31 years old, and done both hamstrings the last 6 weeks. That's a concern. Bearing in mind the drop off when he comes out of that side is a concern. Gomes was an opportunity to maybe offer a little bit of mitigation from that, even if it means bringing Doucoure off for the last 15 minutes of games, just to kind of, Gomes at least offered an opportunity to do something, or suggested he might offer an opportunity to do that. That opportunity is now gone, and again, you can't be too reliant on his fitness. Big question mark just over Danjuma, because again, the next obvious place to go is Harrison, and that for that to work, really need Danjuma to be available to play out on the wing. And that's why everyone could do with keeping him. I personally think, and that's why I've been surprised that he hasn't had more minutes this month.
The third goal then, obviously absolute chaos, final minutes of the game, and, Luton, it's kind of just legs flailing everywhere, and then the ball goes in the back of the net. We've obviously got to do better defending it. I'm not slagging Virginia off or anything like that. I actually called for them to start the game against Luton. So, but could he have done better? To get that ball.
Much, I think. Yeah, they're a big physical side. I thought Virginia played well the other day. I thought he made a couple of good saves. The reality was Everton just couldn't deal with their men in the box and the quality of the balls coming into them, and it was frustrating. They shouldn't have been in a situation where they're conceding the corner that late in the first place. Hopefully, you'd like to think they'd have been a bit cuter. I think there's probably an element of it with both sides where neither really wanted a replay. No, I don't think that meant that I don't think under any circumstances does that mean that either of those sides wanted to lose, but perhaps there was a little bit more kind of carelessness or adventure in the game at the final stage just because of that.
Okay, so Gareth Jones has just submitted an opinion on YouTube, and it kind of connects to me. My next question, really. So he says, Luton made 5 substitutions on Saturday. Agree we don't have much squad depth, but just feel the same players are being flogged. Dobbin, Danjuma surely could have come on earlier. I mean, there's no question in it. It's obviously an opinion, but I think I completely agree to an extent. Are Dyche's substitutions too like for like?
Well, he doesn't make them. So
when he does make them,
even in the first place, it was very notable that Luton had made 5 subs before Everton had made 1. I think it's a shame because I think 12 months ago we were all bemoaning the fact that sides were able to change the game going into the last 20 minutes by the subs that they could make that Everton couldn't make, and that was one thing when you were watching, say, the likes of Villa do it, or the likes of even the likes of Forest do it for the final bit game, 15 minutes at the City ground last season, because obviously they spent so much money. One thing they do have is a massive squad. But when we get into a point now where Luton, who have come up from the Championship and barely spent a penny, making all 5, and some of those, one of them scored the winner. So some of those players are having an influence. There wasn't a significant drop off that Everton were able to take advantage of. It's a concern. I think that. I completely agree with Gareth on that. I think that there's an inevitability around the tiredness of the players, because so few players are having to play so many games. I do wonder if some of that could be mitigated a little bit by players coming off the last 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Now, Dyche doesn't have a lot of options, of course, he doesn't. But again, this is where you'd think that, turning to Danjuma and or Dobbin for the last 15, 20 minutes of games might mean that Harrison and McNeil, are fresher going into this period, and that's a frustration I think a lot of Everton fans have, and I can understand why.
But there's never really any real thought that goes into it. It is literally just like that striker's not playing well, that striker hasn't scored, I'm going to put another striker on. There's never any real, I'm not asking for a major tactical change when you're 0-0 or 1-0 down, but could a Danjuma coming on with a Dobbin, instead of just a Shemetti for a Calvert-Lewin. I mean, I actually thought Beto started to play a lot better when Calvert-Lewin went off. I don't know if that has got anything to do with Calvert-Lewin going off, or whether there was actually a change in, tactics or perception of the way we were playing, because Shemetti was kind of still the second striker, the second forward up there, wasn't he?
Yeah, well, I don't think, as I said a minute ago, I think Everton only really have one way of playing, one way of effectively playing. So I don't think that I don't think he really has the resources there to be changing tactics too dramatically in games. No, that's when he's set up in his normal way, with one up top. Obviously, he could have done that at the weekend. The like-for-like replacements I don't necessarily have an issue with so much. I think back to Brentford, Beto comes off after a good game, Dominic Calvert-Lewin comes on, scores a goal that starts his goal-scoring run. You look at other changes that have been made. Obviously, Beto came on and scored his goal against Newcastle. Dobbin came on and scored his goal against Chelsea. There was a period in and around Christmas when squad players were coming on and doing really well. And I think part of the reason for their success was they knew the role that they were coming into when they were going onto the pitch. I think that the reality is he has so few options that I don't know how much he can change the tactics. But I do think it is a bit galling there when you're looking there, and you can see Everton need a spark, and you can see Luton are trying to do that, and I think there is a stubbornness there, perhaps, that I think that I don't think you can see the game as a 90-minute game for 11 players or 12 or 13 players anymore. I think that I think that you have to kind of view the modern Premier League game now as almost and its least at its lowest two separate games. The first 60, 70 minutes and the next 20 when most sides bring 2 or 3 players on. And to some extremes, almost 3 games, and the final 10 minutes with all the added on time, and teams bring 2 more players on, and it's interesting. Dyche is the only man. I mean, I haven't looked at the statistics on this, but Dyche seems to be the only manager I think is holding firm on almost trying to approach the game as if it hasn't changed in relation to substitutes and the amount of time that you get added on, and that's an interesting tactic. And look, it was fine when Everton were winning all those games. And I think that it's really, really important right now to just go take a step back, because it's very easy to be negative about all this, and obviously it was very bad on Saturday, and we're all worried about where Everton are in the league. But I think that it's only fair to take a step back when you try and judge Dyche, and we talk about these little things. You've got to look at the big thing, the big picture, and the big picture is that he's taken a side that's been in 2 consecutive relegation battles, hardly spent a penny, and it's just cut costs everywhere. So it's an absolute threadbare squad, and whatever his approach to tactics are, whatever his approach to team selection is, whatever his approach to substitutions is, this is a side that should be 12, 11 points clear of trouble. That is a phenomenal achievement. And really, we're here we are nitpicking at little bits of frustrations. Now all those are amplified because of the deduction, and it's right that they're amplified because of the deduction, because it means that Everton can't be naive to what the second half of the season could look like, particularly if injuries continue to bite, if they can't recreate some of that form going forward. But I really do think the context, the backdrop to all these conversations has to be, all right, we're questioning elements of what Dyche is doing, but against the backdrop of those, whilst we're asking those little questions, the bigger picture is really, for all intents and purposes, he's done a very, very good job, and he has every right to feel vindicated by the collection of all his decisions this season so far, because they should be 11 points clear. It's not his fault they got a 10-point deduction. He might have to adapt going forward because he's got to deal with that, but the hard work had largely already been done this season on the pitch, and there's only so much that he can do.
No, I mean you're right. It is all about expectation, and expectation has risen. From them 4 wins in a row in the back end of last season. This is no disrespect to Luton, because they deserved everything that they got from Goodison Park on the 2 occasions this season. I'm just disappointed that we've been knocked out by Luton. We should be getting knocked out by City in the next round, and then at least then you could say, well, it was Manchester City. Do you know what I mean? But we'll put it to bed, because it is a negative, and we don't want to dwell too much on the negatives, but it's about survival. And obviously that's going to continue tomorrow night or Tuesday night with a tough game against Fulham. Another bogey team for us, Joe.
Yeah, Dyche's kryptonite, really. 3 times they won at Goodison Park in 2023, all against Dyche. They just always seem to find a way. And the frustrating thing is, I think, well, certainly in the 3-1 game, the back end is spring of last year, and I think in the Carabao Cup game they looked comfortably better than Everton. The first game of the season, Everton should have won that, really.
Yeah.
I mean,
played well.
Some of those chances that they should have been a couple of goals up at half time, really. So, I mean, Fulham have played a lot of games, because obviously they've had the Carabao Cup semi-finals with Liverpool. But yeah, they are absolutely a bogey side. It's a tricky game for, as we've seen, it's a tricky game for a full strength Everton side. This is an Everton side that goes down to Craven Cottage without Gomes, without Doucoure, without Coleman, without Young. Obviously, not all of these players would be playing, but we'll be starting without Idrissa Gueye, and with Dominic Calvert-Lewin on a really difficult run of form. So,
well, we need something now, don't we? We really need at least a point, because we've got Spurs and then City next.
Well, Spurs and City, it's again, this is, I think, why I can understand why there's a bit of deflation and concern in the mood and the atmosphere at the minute, because whilst Dyche needs to be judged from the bigger picture, and the bigger picture is that he's created a side out of nothing that should be mid-table in the Premier League, you can then take a step out and look at Everton as the bigger picture and go, well, for all that being said, they're 1 point clear of trouble with a whole host of injuries, hardly anyone left in the a threadbare squad.
Yeah.
obviously a fight against one deduction underway, and we'll see where that takes us. But the threat of another deduction underway, and then there's all the instability and uncertainty around the takeover as well. So it is a very precarious position that Everton find themselves in. And against that backdrop, this week really does feel very important in terms of what happens in the final stage of the transfer window. And for all intents and purposes, it suggests it's going to be quiet. But I'd be interested to see if somebody was to put a cheeky bid in for an Everton player that is significant to the team. It would be interesting to see how much resolve and how much resilience the club has to, from a financial perspective, if something like that happens. Because obviously the knock-on impact could be huge. And then also, you're right. There's this Fulham game, there's the Spurs game, there's the City game that come up. And look, this Everton side has shown it's more than capable of taking points off pretty much anybody under Sean Dyche, and we shouldn't be surprised if it went and got a point at Spurs and then if it got a point at Fulham and then beat Spurs. But there's also a scenario where an injury hit side that's low momentum loses to 3 teams that are better than it so far this season, and all of a sudden in 10 days we're looking at things and Everton are back in the relegation zone. Things could look worse before they have a chance to get better, and I think that it's frustrating that having come out of one difficult period and built all that momentum up in the first half of the season to a point where Everton should be, have the points to be sitting in mid-table, they now have to find the willpower and the strength to do it again. And that's the hard thing. You're digging down into the same reserves, not just of the players and the manager, to be fair, but also from the fans, just to go through it again. And you just wonder how many times they can return to that well. And hopefully it is another time, and hopefully the quality and the strength and the organisation and the resilience and the determination that Dyche was able to draw from these players in the autumn and early winter of this season, he can get that going again. But it might be, it is going to be tough for us all, I think.
Brass Monkey on YouTube has said Dyche will have to start resting players or be forced to play them injured. I don't even think we've got the opportunity to rest any players.
Well, I mean, this is it. He was saying this. We were asking about him after the Luton game. Asking about what players, and he's not expecting to have any players back. He was basically saying, look, Ashley Young is on the bench against Luton, but you want him really ready. Probably needed another week. And he's saying he's have to make some of these judgment calls, and now it's I can't risk playing a player who's 75% because I can't risk losing him for a longer period of time, bearing in mind the other injuries that he's got. I think we can all see that. Look, the squad is weak in a number of positions. There has a little bit of cover in some positions. Obviously, I think that we are all a lot more confident over João Virginia's ability to cover Jordan Pickford than we were at the beginning of January. That's been a major positive for Everton this January. He's played 3 games and played very well in all 3. Centre back, I think they could cover a loss to a certain extent. Through Godfrey and Michael Keane. I know people would assume there'd be a drop off there, but there are still experienced Premier League players there that potentially do a job. But you look elsewhere across the pitch, and that experience doesn't really exist. Obviously, you got Beto and Calvert-Lewin that can rotate up top, but beyond that, it's difficult, or at least it's difficult while they have the injuries and Idrissa Gueye's away. And for all those reasons, I keep coming back to this. It feels like Danjuma is a key component of making sure that squad can still function for the next few months. And with the fact that there is opportunity from elsewhere, it feels like Everton could gain a lot by just making him feel a little bit more wanted. And they've had opportunities to do that over the past few weeks, and they haven't taken them, and that surprises me because he is the obvious alternative for a lot of these things.
To turn things around and get momentum back on our side.
Not necessarily to do that, but just to be able to carry on functioning, just to be able to keep things going. That's it. If we want to, Jack Harrison is the obvious moving infield is the obvious solution to Doucoure Doucoure being out, and it only really works if you've got someone that can cover Jack Harrison out wide, and that probably needs to be Danjuma.
I mean, we'll come on to starting the lineups, but what about a Godfrey in the centre of the park? Would that work? Would you not?
No, I don't think so. Cause I don't. And then who else alongside him?
So just the usual Garner and Onana in the middle of the park with the three. I just feel like I'm not suggesting I would do this. I'm just thinking, what would Dyche do?
Yeah, well, if the problem with that, the problem that Everton have is the gap that goes between midfield and the defence. I'm not sure how that's. I'm not sure who then approaches that. I mean, will we suggest that Onana push for forward or
Probably Garner.
probably Garner? Yeah, like I mean maybe, but I mean Godfrey, we haven't seen him in centre midfield for some time.
No.
I've watched a lot of Godfrey in centre midfield at a lower level and liked him at it, but yeah, that would be. We saw Dyche do this a little bit with Mason Holgate, almost. And Lampard did it as well, and it never really worked. I mean, I'd be surprised to see that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I just thought I'd throw it out there. Injury update. Then you kind of touched upon it, but if you want to just the existing players that were already out, Doucoure, absolutely no chance for Fulham.
Yeah, none of them are coming back for Fulham according to Dyche.
And does that include Gomes as well?
Yeah, Gomes. So
we are looking at some sort of again makeshift midfield.
Yeah, I think so. It's a little bit sketchy on the time frames with Doucoure and Gomes. I think it's probably fair to say they're both awful, also doubtful. Gomes is certainly doubtful for the weekend. And to be honest, Dyche said it'll be a matter of time in relation to Gomes. Well, matter of time could be any length of time. It could be 24 hours or could be 6 months. But like, I'm not saying it's going to be 6 months by any stretch of the imagination. But I think the same group of players certainly for Fulham and quite possibly for Spurs as well. So
just not with two up top.
Can't play with two up top again, or not with the same tactics that they played with them.
No, absolutely not. Okay then, Joe, it's deadline day on Thursday.
Yeah.
You kind of touched upon it a little bit, but can you see any incomings? Can you see any outgoings? What's the situation? We know Doucoure's been linked. We know Onana's been linked. It's not looking great.
Well, yeah, all the noises have been that it's going to be quiet and expects to be quiet. But I do think across the leagues we'll see a late flurry of activity because such little business has been done. You see West Ham are starting to make a few moves in the market now, and there will be knock-on effects as a result of that. I'm sure that Everton done due diligence on a lot of players, and if a late opportunity came up, then I'm sure they would try to strike. But obviously they're in a situation where they're limited by finances. Like I think it would be a loan deal for anyone that did come up. I think probably the bigger issue is keeping hold of the players that they've got. And we know there's a lot of interest in Onana and Branthwaite, and I think you've covered this a lot on this podcast. I think some of the clubs that are after them don't have huge amounts of money that they can spend right at this moment in time for their own kind of profit and sustainability positions. But there are clubs out there with money, and there are clubs out there that probably know that Onana and Branthwaite might be long-term solutions to problems for them. And players that can have long and good futures for them at a top level. And given the uncertainty around Everton from the finances and with the takeover and things like that, if one of them had a little bit of spare cash, you wonder what would happen if they would. This might be their last opportunity to come to Everton for a bargain. Everton's bargaining power might not be particularly strong, while there's the uncertainty over the takeover and where that's going to go. So it'd be interesting to see how much resilience there is in the finances. Same goes for Doucoure, obviously a player at the other end of his career, but of such incredible importance to him. We know that Al Ettifaq are interested in him. Now, they might have been put off by his injuries now.
I was going to say, this is a ridiculous statement. Is it a blessing in disguise that he's injured?
Possibly. Depending on how long it takes him to come back and what he's like when he comes back. But, it certainly hasn't given him an opportunity to strengthen his case.
It's gone quiet as well on it, hasn't it?
Has gone quiet on it. Obviously, we know that the Saudi clubs have enough money to kind of make things interesting. And Everton will have to look at it from the perspective of, like we said, 31-year-old who's done both his hamstrings recently. But given the importance of Doucoure, and his importance only grows when he's not in that side, and we see how much they miss him. Yeah. I don't think there's a price that. I don't think there's a price that almost works for him, because you're probably looking at, it's a big gamble without him, and you're gambling Premier League status unless Everton get some of the points back, and therefore, what is a reasonable price for him?
There's no reasonable price, is there? Because he's, He's irreplaceable at this moment in time.
And Dyche is publicly. Dyche is saying that he hasn't been told of any issues where he might have to sell. He believes Everton are in a stronger position this summer than they have, so this January, than have been in recent windows. Obviously, he came in last January. They just sold Anthony Gordon, didn't sign anybody, and then over the summer, he lost to Wobie on deadline day. So he doesn't think, or he's saying he hasn't been told that there's any pressure to sell. He thinks that the good work from previous windows, or the cautious work from previous windows, has strengthened their position this time round. But I think it's easy to I think it's easier to tell him that when there are no big bids coming in for players, and it'll be interesting to see what Everton were to do if a big bid was to, or if a reasonable bid was to materialise for a key player, because the squad can't really take many more losses. But then the finances are a concern as well, whilst there's instability around the takeover. So, I've been doing this job for nearly 2 years now, and whilst my instincts are telling me to say, whilst everything who I'm asking is saying, it's going to be a quiet few days, my instincts are telling me I can't remember ever having a quiet few days covering Everton, and this is obviously another pinch point really over the next few days, and I do think this is because I say the Fulham game's important. If Everton were to, the dream scenario is that Everton go to a Fulham that's just as knackered as they are, and almost reset after, like you said earlier, it feels like the bubble popped when Everton lost to Fulham in the Carabao Cup. Will be a great way to kind of rebuild it again, go down there and get what would be any positive result there would be really good. And then that could maybe just start moving them on the forward trajectory. But it's a really big game, and the final days of the transfer window are really big. Because Everton are in a situation where, one outgoing or one incoming could both have such a dramatic effect on where the squad currently is, that it doesn't take a lot of business to have a big effect, a big impact. So that's really interesting. And then obviously going into Spurs, and again, Spurs, Everton were so good at them. I know I just mentioned the bubble popping against Fulham. They did go to Spurs the following Saturday, and they were a better side, and they were, I was so impressed with them in that game.
We didn't play bad against City either, second
half. First half, very good against City. It's just. But the thing is, what happens when you've got such a small squad and such a busy schedule? The options are so limited, aren't they? So, and having a position at the minute where their options are even more limited. But fingers crossed, we are sitting here in a week's time, and Everton have got 4 points or even 2 points, and they've kept hold of their better players, and Danjuma stayed and got a game and looks invested with the squad, and we're going, you know what, things might not be too bad, but got to get there first.
Well, I can feel a sneeze coming up, so one quick question before I do sneeze. Jesse Lingard, free, I think, still. Is he one that we should be looking at? Is he one that the club is looking at?
I mean, they've looked at him in the past. I don't think he's not a Dyche player.
No.
And I don't think that there's serious interest in there. I think there have been a few kind of murmurs from around, apparently for people around him, like I've seen reported by by Sky mainly, that all of a sudden it's all about playing football for him and it's nothing to do with money, and thinks he just wants to get back in the game. I mean, it'd be an interesting addition. He'd be an option in that gap where Doucoure, that kind of, he was a different type of player to Doucoure, but he would be another creative option.
And would it push Danjuma down the pecking order again?
Well, it push Danjuma down the pecking order, but Everton, I mean, he's not particularly high at the minute, is he? So, I'd be surprised if Lingard came in from a financial perspective, from a player perspective, from all sorts. I would be surprised. But do I think from a talent level, Everton would be in a strong position with him? Well, yeah, like he would be another option, but that's not necessarily me saying they should go for him.
If he was that desperate to play football, and he's obviously struggling to get a club, he might get one before the deadline shuts on Thursday, but could we persuade them to get a pay as you play? That might be more beneficial, certainly for Everton, and then it would show that he was committed to to playing whoever he comes in for.
Finances would be key to everything. Everton aren't in a position to be paying anything like the wages that I think that he's had previously in previous clubs. So I don't think a conversation even gets off the ground unless Everton would be, and probably most clubs, because obviously we've got to bear in mind he hasn't played football for 6 months, and Everton needs someone that can come in and do a job now, ideally, not someone that's maybe going to take 3 or 4 weeks to get up to full match fitness. And when you think of Dyche and the match sharpness that he demands, then again, that's also a problem. So.
All right, well, we'll finish off, but before we do, we'll do predictions and starting lineup. We've already glossed over the starting lineup and maybe suggested what we do, but do you want to name your 11, Joe, for what you think Fulham's going to be?
I'd go, but obviously Pickford comes back in goal. Defence picks itself because it's the only one that's, I think Coleman and Young aren't expected to be back available, so Patterson starts, and then, be 4-5-1 for me with Harrison kind of playing in behind Dominic Calvert-Lewin and Danjuma. Probably playing on the left and moving McNeil over to the right, I think.
He's got to come in, Danjuma, hasn't he? He's got to.
I don't, as I say, I think it'll be really, really telling if he doesn't. I just don't see a sensible way around, around him not playing. I don't really see a sensible way of setting up, given the injuries that they have at the minute that doesn't include him in the starting lineup. And if you put him on the left and where he prefers to be of the two options, you can put McNeil on the right then, and that gives Patterson a little bit of protection to get to deal with Willian, who obviously causes Everton so many problems, or has done recently. So gives him it has the kind of the player that's more accustomed to tracking back just there on the right, just to kind of offer Patterson some protection, give Everton a little bit more stability. So
well, the Blues on YouTube, the YouTube channel The Blues, says has to be that lineup, Joe. Yeah. So obviously, a couple of people in agreement.
Surely it does.
I'm in agreement with you, no doubt.
Even even if it's a case with Danjuma of just giving him a chance and just saying this is your chance to say that you should be have a more active role. It feels like I think that Danjuma is a situation that comes to a head before the end of this season, and obviously we've got the end of this transfer window as it is. If he stays but then that doesn't get an opportunity to play, then I just see a scenario where we get to a point where he perhaps feels like he isn't being shown much respect, and you can understand why Everton going into the second half of this season, given everything that, given how precarious things currently look, they need everyone there to be invested. And surely it makes sense to keep a player of the quality of Danjuma. Now, it might be hit and miss quality, and it might be the type of quality that is secondary to what Dyche wants, but even just to have him as, your 12th man, so he is there for when a Doucoure or a Harrison or a McNeil. There are so many areas. The areas where Everton are at their most fragile are all areas that are strengthened if he is around to either help or he can fill somewhere else so somebody else can come in for him. I don't want to end up I think it would be really disappointing to end up in a situation with the squad where it is currently, to end up in a situation where, say, maybe in 3 or 4 weeks' time, Harrison or McNeil has to miss a game through suspension or through an injury or something like that, or an illness, and we end up in a scenario where we have James Garner playing out wide again. Yeah. He is versatile. He's done a great job everywhere he's played for Everton, but he's a centre midfielder, and he's shown that, and shown that's where his talent lie recently. And I feel like if we end up playing square pegs and round holes because Danjuma has either gone or there's a falling out, then I think that would be a problem of our own creating. And surely we've got to avoid that because there's plenty of people outside externally that are trying to create problems for Everton, and they're enough to deal with at the moment.
Definitely. Another comment saying whether it's Danjuma or Dobbin, it has to be done. I mean, I think I'd go with Danjuma. I completely agree with you, and I think Dobbin, has come on in the past couple of months, and he's been an impact player and he's done quite well. Maybe he could do that again, depending if need be.
If he started, as I say, any scenario in which Danjuma isn't starting would be quite telling.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean to say it would necessarily be, it just can't. He can't do what he did on Saturday.
No prediction then.
Gonna go 1 each.
You said the exact same thing I've got down.
I'm gonna say 1 each. I kind of Fulham fill me with dread because of the 3 games that we've. I mean, it's been 3 very different emotions, isn't it? There's a 3-1 which felt like a game that Everton. Fulham had nothing to play for, did they? I mean, can you remember that game, the 3-1? And it was just that was the game that Everton was supposed to win, to then be like, you know what? They're not going to be, they're just going to pull clean. It's not going to get right to the very depth.
Yeah.
And somehow they lost it. Was it Ben Godfrey played right back, and when Patterson was there on the bench, he's just there thinking, what is going on here? And then there was the first game of the season, which that horrible sinking feeling. Mopé missed those chances. They should have been out of sight, and they didn't. And then obviously there's the cup game, which Everton just didn't turn up in. But then there was look at the resilience of this Everton side. They've been awful, but Beto's come on and they've scored. They've got a way back into it. And,
Yeah.
And then we've spoken about what's happened after it. So like on the one hand, they filled me with such utter dread because it's only been bad news for a year with them. On the other hand, maybe fourth time lucky. Maybe this is maybe even fifth time lucky. Because the time before this, they went to Fulham and Craven. I remember being there on the Saturday evening game, and there are a handful of decisions like this, and I know I'm sure most of the listeners and viewers feel the same way. There are still a handful of VAR decisions that putting aside the 60-40s or the 55-45s, you got hard done by, but there's still a handful that I just really can't understand how they went against Everton. And one of them is the Mitrovic foul on Idrissa Gueye, early stages of that game. I still look back on this, that was a game, that was the Lampard, and I'm not saying that things would have worked out under Frank Lampard, but please don't suggest that. But Everton had just won 3-0 away, at home to Palace, hadn't they, in the October sunshine. It had been gorgeous, and it was probably the high point of Lampard. And then they went to Fulham, drew 0-0. It wasn't a bad, although they'd just come up, it wasn't a bad point because they were in good form. Well, Everton should have been playing against 10 men. Mitrovic should have been off the pitch for over an hour of that game. Imagine if Everton had come away from a win there, and all of a sudden, last season, it probably enters a very different period, doesn't it? It has a very different look now. There might have been a degree of inevitability where things ended up with Lampard and his staff, and bearing in mind the January that unfolded, that was obviously when a lot of that went beyond what was going on in the dressing room and the dugout. But maybe it's fifth time lucky against Everton. Are due some luck against Fulham, and I do think there is quality in that side, and it's demonstrated enough, particularly away from home, to suggest that Everton can go down there and get a result. And I think it would make us all a lot happier, and it really would lift the mood if Everton could go down there and get a win. I think a draw would still be a very good result given the current circumstances. I'd take one each.
Well, people think we probably compared notes with the team lineup and the predictions of 1-1 each, but we haven't. So, but I'm still going 1-1. Like I say, I think it'll still be a positive result, even if it's only a point, because obviously the game's coming up. It's gonna be tough. But Joe, we said we'd do half an hour, 40 minutes. We've done over an hour. So yeah, I hope everyone listening on YouTube and Facebook Live has enjoyed it. Plenty more Everton content to come. Obviously, you're going to be down at Craven Cottage tomorrow. Journey tomorrow, or are you going today?
Yeah, going down Craven Cottage. Going down to London Tuesday and coming back on Wednesday. And then it's transfer deadline day. So my week currently looks like it goes Craven Cottage, travelling back from London, then probably Finch Farm for what I imagine will be a Thursday conference ahead of Spurs, and then a long night looking at the transfer latest and wondering what it's going to hold, because remember this time last year was January and it was just watching with just sheer kind of bemusement when nothing happened and thinking, how have Everton not God, because it felt like they did need it, didn't they? And then obviously there was the last day, the last transfer window, when all of a sudden it was just like, oh, what? Iwobi's going and Cannon's going, and all right, Mopé kind of understand, but what is going on? So God knows what's going to have in store for this one for us. So, but everything that I know, you'll know as well.
No, absolutely, and I'm just glad I've got through this podcast without sneezing, to be honest.
Well.
Yeah, so everyone, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Please remember to like, subscribe, share our Everton FC Facebook page and our Royal Blue YouTube channel. Once again, we'll have plenty more Everton content, reactions to the Fulham game, and plenty more deadline day content over the course of the next couple of weeks. Joe, thank you so much.
Thank you.